They didn't just turn off the lights in Moscow. They turned off a lie. In one frozen second, $100 million of carefully engineered optimism vanished. The largest New Year's festival on the planet collapsed into silence. Screens went black. Music died mid-note. And the message was unmistakable. The fortress is not real. I want you to understand something very clearly. This was not about electricity. It was about power, real power, and who actually holds it in the modern world. I've spent decades studying empires, economies, and security systems. And history is ruthless on this point. When a system needs spectacle to prove it's strong, it's already afraid. When it fails publicly, it's already broken. If you think this story is about Ukraine and Russia, you're missing the point. This is about what happens when intelligence becomes cheaper than defense and creativity outpaces money. Stay with me, because before we can understand how Moscow went dark, we need to understand why this symbol mattered so much in the first place. To the Kremlin, that festival was not entertainment, it was architecture. Psychological architecture. VDNKH exists to perform a single function, to reassure millions of people that the system is stable, protected, and inevitable. That life inside the fortress is normal, joyful, untouchable. When tanks are burning hundreds of miles away, the lights must shine even brighter at home. Authoritarian systems depend on this illusion, not because citizens are foolish, but because fear is expensive. Optimism is cheaper if you can manufacture it at scale. That's why this location mattered. A blackout anywhere else is a technical issue. A blackout here, on this night, at the most symbolically charged moment of the year, is a systemic wound. It tells the public something the state never wants them to feel: vulnerability. And once people feel vulnerability, control becomes fragile. This is the point most commentators miss. The real target wasn't infrastructure. It was perception, confidence, the story people tell themselves about safety. To understand how that story was shattered, we have to step back into history, cycles, and the logic of power itself. History teaches us something uncomfortable. Power never collapses at the front line first. It collapses at the center of belief. Empires fall when the cost of defending symbols becomes higher than the value of the symbols themselves. This is not new. Rome learned it. The Soviet Union learned it. Every centralized system eventually learns it the hard way. Modern military doctrine was built on an assumption born in the 20th century that security scales with money. Bigger budgets, bigger weapons, bigger deterrence. But that logic belongs to an era of factories and steel, not algorithms and cognition. What has changed is the cycle of innovation. It no longer flows from the state downward. It flows from garages, universities, startups, and improvised battlefields upward. Creativity now moves faster than procurement. Code evolves faster than doctrine. This creates a dangerous lag. Massive defense systems are designed to defeat yesterday's threats, while today's threats are being invented in real time by people with nothing to lose and everything to learn. When that gap opens, history accelerates. And when history accelerates, the first cracks don't appear on the battlefield, they appear at the heart of legitimacy. That's exactly where the next fracture begins. The first strike was never meant to win. It was meant to test a slow-moving drone drifting toward one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth. Should have been a joke. On paper, it was suicide. Moscow is wrapped in layers of air defense designed to stop cruise missiles, fighter jets, even hypersonic threats. But systems don't fight paper. They fight assumptions. What entered that airspace wasn't raw firepower. It was confusion. Cheap decoys forced million-dollar interceptors into the air. Operators faced a false choice: shoot everything or risk missing something. Under pressure, doctrine collapses into instinct. And instinct is expensive. Each interceptor burned through resources faster than any drone ever could. Each radar track diluted attention. The system responded exactly as it was designed to, and that was the problem. This is the first lesson of the night. Defense systems optimized for rarity fail when attacked by abundance. If you're watching this and thinking, that can't scale, You're already behind the curve. Scale no longer belongs to factories. It belongs to iteration. And while the defenders were celebrating survival, something far more dangerous was still moving quietly toward the heart of the grid. Here is the mechanism most people misunderstand. This wasn't a breakthrough in hardware. It was a breakthrough in logic. Traditional defense systems are built around scarcity. Few targets, high value, clear signatures. That model collapses when the attacker flips the equation, when targets become cheap, numerous, and cognitively demanding. The defender is forced to spend more attention, more time, and more money per decision. And attention is the real bottleneck. A radar can track hundreds of objects, but a human crew can't meaningfully think about hundreds of threats at once. Under saturation, decision quality degrades. Rules get bent, protocols get skipped. Expensive machines begin to behave like nervous animals. Now layer in modern algorithms, autonomy, pattern recognition, systems that don't panic, don't hesitate, and don't need permission once the mission logic is set. You're no longer fighting a weapon, you're fighting a process. This is where the balance breaks. Defense systems scale linearly with cost. Offensive innovation now scales exponentially with learning. That asymmetry doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in moments. And the next moment was about to turn testing into consequence. The second wave is where confidence collapses. This is the moment defenders rarely plan for, not the first impact, but the pause after it. The moment when crews relax, reports are drafted, and victory is prematurely declared. Systems hate uncertainty, so they invent closure. But war punishes closure. As the defenses reset, heat still radiating from overworked barrels and empty missile racks waiting to be reloaded, the sky betrayed them again from a different direction at a different altitude, under different assumptions. Now the math flipped. Less time, fewer options, more noise. Jamming flooded the airwaves. Signals died. Screens flickered. For a brief second, it looked like control had been restored. And that's when the real danger emerged: autonomy. When communication fails, hierarchy collapses. What remains is preloaded intent. Algorithms don't wait for orders. They execute trajectories. They read geometry. They adapt to damage without asking permission. This is the second lesson of the night. You can jam signals, but you can't jam logic. Every defensive move now created a new vulnerability. Every interception bought seconds and seconds were all the attackers needed. What followed was not chaos. It was inevitability. And the consequences of inevitability don't stay confined to the battlefield. Now I want you to put yourself there. You're not a general. You're not a strategist. You're just someone standing in the cold, holding a child's hand, counting down the last seconds of the year. And suddenly silence. No music, no lights, no explanation, just darkness so complete it feels intentional. In that moment, something fundamental shifts inside you. Not fear of an enemy far away, but doubt about the system that promised to protect you. This is how power really erodes. Not through explosions, but through unanswered questions. If this can happen here, tonight, during the most important celebration of the year, what else isn't safe? You don't need propaganda to tell you something went wrong. Your nervous system already knows. And this is where modern conflict becomes personal. Because when civilians experience vulnerability directly, narratives lose their grip. Trust fractures quietly, one lived moment at a time. If this analysis resonates with you, pause for a second. Share it. Not because it's dramatic, but because understanding power is no longer optional. Because what happened next didn't stop at Moscow. It rippled outward. What happened in Moscow did not stay in Moscow. Every capital watching that blackout understood the signal immediately. Not because they sympathized, but because they recognized themselves. The same assumptions, the same procurement logic, the same faith in cost as protection. Defense ministries across the world invest in dominance, the way corporations invest in brand, assuming visibility equals security. But visibility now attracts asymmetry. The brighter the symbol, the cheaper the attack required to undermine it. This is the geopolitical contagion no one wants to discuss. Once a system proves vulnerable, imitation accelerates. Engineers study it. Militias adapt it. States quietly revise their threat models, usually too late. And supply chains feel it next. High voltage transformers, precision components, specialized materials already constrained by sanctions and geopolitics. One substation goes dark, and months of industrial fragility are exposed. This is how local actions become global stress tests. Energy security bleeds into economic confidence bleeds into political stability. The blackout wasn't just a tactical success. It was a warning broadcast to the entire world. And warnings demand forecasts. When systems break, the future doesn't arrive as a single outcome. It branch. The first path is adaptation. States recognize the shift and rebalance, investing less in spectacle and more in resilience, distributed infrastructure, redundancy, civil defense that assumes disruption instead of denying it. This is the difficult path because it requires admitting vulnerability before disaster forces the confession. The second path is denial. Systems double down on cost and control, pouring more money into thicker walls and louder assurances. Surveillance expands, budgets swell, confidence is performed harder than ever. This path feels safer until it isn't. The third path is escalation. Every vulnerability is answered with retaliation. Every innovation triggers imitation. The line between state and non-state actors blurs. Conflict becomes continuous, ambient, and unpredictable. Not total war, perpetual pressure. None of these paths are abstract. We've seen them before in economics, in climate policy, in financial crises. The pattern is always the same. Systems that learn survive. Systems that posture collapse. The question is not which path is possible. The question is which one is already being chosen. And that brings us to the final reckoning. What went dark in Moscow was not just a power grid. It was an illusion. For decades, we were told that superiority belonged to those who could afford the most, the biggest budgets, the most complex machines, the tallest walls. That belief shaped militaries, economies, and political confidence across the world. That belief is now obsolete. What we are witnessing is a structural shift. Intelligence is becoming cheaper than defense. Adaptation is outpacing authority, and systems built on intimidation are being challenged by systems built on learning. This doesn't mean chaos is inevitable, but it does mean comfort is no longer a strategy. If you're a policymaker, this should terrify you because it demands humility. If you're a citizen, this should empower you because it proves that agency still exists. And if you're watching history closely, you already know this isn't an ending. It's a beginning. If this analysis helped you see the world more clearly, share it. These conversations matter. Subscribe if you want to keep unpacking how power, money, and strategy are being rewritten in real time. And ask yourself one final question. If the strongest fortress can go dark, what does security really mean in the age we're entering? We'll continue this conversation next time.